So obviously, Sean Collins, product manager for Atom Runtime, and just want to share a bit with you about what's been recently delivered, as well as what's on tap for the roadmap. So this past quarter, some kind of quality of life type enhancements, if you will. So one update would be to allow for the attachment to an environment as you install your runtime. So this is particularly useful when you have an automated install scenario where, as you spin up, let's say, a scripted unintended install, or maybe even a Docker container, and you want to automate the installation of that or attachment to that to an environment, you can do that. So there's less of a manual intervention required. So excited to incorporate that, particularly on top of some of the elasticity improvements we introduced last quarter. Additionally, kind of quality of life, particularly for those who are leveraging Atom message queuing. We've heard some of the asks for improved monitoring and management of dead letter queues. So as you know, some of those messages are not delivered and they drop off to a dead letter queue, what are ways in which I can monitor that more effectively? So we've introduced JMX endpoints to facilitate that, as well as allowing for the Atom queue connector itself to support get and listen from the dead letter queue directly. So you can incorporate that as part of your normal processing instead of having to, again, intercede manually to pull those messages off and act on them accordingly. And then another enhancement here is around the Atom Cloud tenants. So for those of you attached to our public Atom Clouds, or if you're a tenant in another measure of a cloud, being able to, as a tenant, download the Atom worker logs, even the execution artifacts more directly. So obviously facilitating deeper insight and troubleshooting capabilities without requiring the intervention of whomever the Atom Cloud administrator is. Obviously, this is enforced by permissions by the Atom Cloud owner, but as part of our public Atom Clouds, we'll be enabling that ability to download those logs and artifacts for those who have Atom management privileges as part of their role on the platform. Okay, and then from a program perspective, continuing to invest in the migration of those who are on some of our I would say our older infrastructure, to be able to modernize that and move them to our AWS runtimes. So looking ahead, from just a visualization of what we just talked about. So obviously the environment attachment obviously presented to you with your environments as part of that install, if that's something you want to do on a user interface perspective. But also from the Atom queue connector, you see that option provided to you as an option to flag to either consume from the dead letter queue or not, or directly from the queue itself. So obviously that ease of use and configuration approach to the usage. So looking forward from a runtime perspective, as we kind of talked about last quarter relative to our elasticity enhancements, we want to build upon that momentum and start to expand upon some of the molecule quick start aspects. So be on the lookout for an announcement next week relative to out of this world around some recent innovations we've made in that space. And also we want to move beyond just kind of AWS from that perspective and start to open the multi-cloud type use cases that we can start to facilitate. So we'll be similarly investing in other infrastructures and service providers to facilitate that same type of flexibility. And when we talk about the quick start, as a reminder, it's a means to essentially take a configuration-based approach to automate the installation of a molecule in the infrastructure of your choice. So obviously in an AWS quick start, having the facility to be able to provide your credentials, light configuration, and it automates that installation for you, turning something that can sometimes be, you know, a matter of a couple of days to install based upon some configuration challenges that can arise, to facilitating the ability to spin up in a matter of minutes. We'll continue to do the investment in the Atom queue usability for those of you leveraging Atom message queuing to facilitate obviously easier management throughout the usage of that. But again, another thing we want to make sure we invest in, it facilitates part of the multi-cloud vision as well, but some of the simplification of the Java deployment, particularly for your runtime, right? So when we think about the aspect of the Java runtime upgrade, we'll be looking to support Java 11 as we turn into the new year here. But some part of the aspect is that rather than requiring manual updates by the administrators themselves, we want to facilitate the automation of the updates or the upgrades of those Java enhancements through the interface and allow that to be scheduled, similar to what we do with release control. So you look for that innovation in the next coming months here to facilitate both that automation, but also facilitate some of those aspects as we move to Java 11 to ease any of the maintenance burden with that upgrade. Kind of continuing on that theme of kind of simplifying some of the insight and troubleshooting and monitoring, we want to improve the real-time troubleshooting aspects of those of you who are leveraging, let's say, real-time use cases in your infrastructure. And quite often when you change that configuration from general mode to low latency, you lose some of the deeper logging and insights. We want to facilitate some of the triggering of that to, let's say, capture a burst of logging for a specific time frame so you can gain deeper insight should issues arise in that aspect. And we want to start to invest more broadly in the architecture. So we talked about the investments of elasticity. It was the stepping stone towards a larger investment in the runtime, architecturally speaking. So we want to start to enhance the reliability and scale. What that means is diminish the dependency on the shared file system for, let's say, things such as documents and execution history, and allow for a greater dependency on the surrounding services that we can leverage. So start to think about ways in which we can externalize some of the aspects of loggings, externalize some of the aspects of document data storage, and put that and store that less in the actual runtime itself. So as we start to make those investments, you'll start to see some of the flexibility we'll be able to afford you relative to enhanced molecule elasticity, as well as some of the cloud elasticity aspects. The difference being molecule elasticity is really focused on that single tenant implementation, right? So the aspect of being able to independently scale for your use cases, whereas the cloud elasticity, you want to provide some flexibility as you start to have these multi-tenant infrastructures. How can I allow my individual tenants on that runtime to scale independently of one another? So I'm not having to scale the entirety of my infrastructure to accommodate, let's say, the use cases of independent tenants within there. And then building upon the aspect we just talked about with the quick starts before, we want to start to think about ways in which we can simplify that interaction with those quick starts. So as we start to think about that investment in elasticity and multi-cloud, the multi-cloud use case, if we start to think about spinning those runtimes up in those infrastructures, quite often it requires a jumping from one interface to another to start to instantiate those runtimes or those infrastructures. We want to start to embed some of those interactions to facilitate that ease of maintenance and ease of use to witness that value as you spin up those runtimes. So look for that in the coming year relative to that. And obviously some of those aspects we talk about later on are some of the simplified configuration, as well as some of the aspects of leveraging intelligence to provide for smart configuration relative to scheduling, as well as predictive monitoring as we start to think about ways in which we can further simplify that insight and monitoring relative to your infrastructure. So obviously a lot that we're focused on, but really excited about the coming year. And again, as others have stated, we'll have a focused talk at Out of This World next week, specifically on the elasticity and multi-cloud investments for the runtime. So be on the lookout for that. So with that, I'd like to really just hand it off to Byron, who's going to speak to you a bit about the B2B and EDI investments.